The strangely hilarious things people used to do to avoid dead awkwardness. Yes, we're talking about the glorious days when people actually buried bells with their loved ones, slathered themselves with garlic that wasn't for pasta, and dug up the dearly departed more often than your grandma checks Facebook. If you think modern life is filled with weird anxieties, try living in a time when your number one fear wasn't missing a work email, but accidentally waking up buried alive, or worse, watching your neighbor re-enter society with a suspicious cough and a hunger for brains. Before we spiral into the world of grave digging and anti-vampire hacks, hit that like button and subscribe, but only if you actually enjoy what I do here. Drop me a comment with your weirdest family ritual, because nobody gets through history without at least one superstitious grandma. Go ahead, dim those lights, switch on a fan for atmospheric whooshing, slide under your covers, and maybe tuck your fingers away in case you start craving garlic. But seriously, have you ever wondered why people genuinely believed their neighbors would burst out of the grave and demand brunch? Did bells really save anyone, or just create jump scares for unsuspecting birds? Why was garlic the original multi-tool? And honestly, what would you do if you accidentally dug up Steve from next door for his encore performance? Would you have survived a night in a graveyard with nothing but a candle, a bad attitude, and a pocket full of cloves? Congratulations! You've just woken up in the 17th century, where every village comes with its own cryptic burial hacks. The collective anxiety level is set to paranormal, and it's not even Halloween yet. You awaken with a start, feeling an itchy string around your finger. A gentle chime echoes overhead. Because nothing says peace of mind like the possibility of frantically ringing for help while 6 feet under. In the 18th and 19th centuries, the terror of premature burial wasn't just a quirky superstition, it was a full-blown crisis. Newspapers bristled with lurid tales of exhumed bodies found clinging to coffin lids, nails shredded, teeth shattered. As medical science slogged forward, society's collective faith in doctors' ability to determine death lagged behind. Enter the professional worrywarts, inventors, and opportunists, who pounced on the public's worst nightmares by hawking safety coffins. These ghoulish gadgets ranged from the ingenious to the absurd. At their core was the one thing, a lifeline, usually a taut piece of string or wire, rigged to a bell, a flag, sometimes even a small speaking tube. If the corpse should stir, twitch, or cough, the slightest movement could set off a peal of hope. Clang, clang. The Dead Ringers Club was open for business. Bugs. Sometimes, the strings snagged on clothing or decomposed joints, triggering accidental alarms. Gravediggers would race over, shovels in hand, only to find their miracle save was the handiwork of a tumbling femur rather than a revived uncle. Some cemeteries went so far as to hire watchmen, graveyard night shift workers listening for bells in the darkness, equipped with lanterns and nerves of steel, or, more likely, the opposite. Imagine getting paid minimum wage to snatch the living from the jaws of eternal slumber, or, more likely, sprint home at the first tinkle. Not everyone was convinced this system was foolproof. Skeptics looked askance at the entire endeavor, wondering if more than a few saves were merely wishful thinking. You could get a knighthood for saving someone who never really needed saving, or more often, for taking credit when a strong wind rang the bell. It's the Victorian equivalent of the smoke detector that only chirps at 3 in the morning. The popularity of safety coffins even spurred a sort of social arms race among the anxious classes. The prepared displayed diagrams in their parlors. See. Some went further, specifying instructions in their wills about which manufacturer's bell system should be installed. One can only imagine the competitive side-eye at funerals. Oh, you didn't use the Swiss pulley. Of course, all of this raises one burning question. Did any of it ever work? Reports of actual saves are hazy at best, usually the stuff of rumors or highly embellished local legend. The more likely scenario is that the idea of the bell served its purpose, not as a rescue mechanism, but as a psychological comfort. When faced with the uncanny valley between life and death, who wouldn't clutch at the nearest string? Sometimes literally. And as the bell-tolling sleeper club flourished, it inspired a curious kind of hope. It perched right at the intersection of fear and technology, superstition and progress, a tangible thread binding the living and the dead. In the end, whether you trusted medicine or mechanics, one thing was for certain: you'd never really sleep alone. With a bell at your fingertips and a watchman's lantern swinging in the gloom, you could rest in the half assurance that, should you stir, someone, somewhere, might be listening. Let me know if you need further adjustments, punchlines, or extra factards woven in. It's morning, and you've never smelled worse. That's intentional. You are wearing a necklace made of garlic, not so much to ward off bugs, but to help you avoid people with pointy teeth and questionable intentions. Trusted by peasants, nobles, and basically everyone who's ever seen a shadow in the wrong place. Garlic's reputation as a supernatural shield stretches back centuries and across continents. In ancient Eastern Europe, garlic wasn't just a kitchen staple, it was a first line of defense against anything that went bump in the night. If you believe the stories, the vampires lurking in the woods weren't just hungry for blood, they were peculiarly sensitive to the scent of a fresh bulb. The logic, if you can call it that, was both practical and mystical. Garlic, with its assertive aroma and almost medicinal strength, was seen as both a purifying agent and a powerful deterrent against evil. But garlic wasn't just hung around necks, it was smeared on doors, tucked beneath pillows, and in some places, even buried with the dead to make sure nothing peculiar decided to crawl out. In the Balkans, mothers sometimes rubbed garlic on their children's foreheads before bed. Interestingly, the association between garlic and supernatural protection wasn't confined to vampire-phobic societies. In ancient Rome, garlic was seen as a ward against all manner of trouble, from bad luck to disease. Roman soldiers ate copious amounts, believing it gave them both strength and stamina, because if you're marching off to war, the last thing you want is to be weak or tasty. It didn't take long for these traditions to spread. In medieval Europe, people hung garlic braids from their doors, believing that no evil, whether spirit or something with fangs, would dare to cross the threshold. Garlic's power, it was said, came from its fiery, raw intensity, a plant so potent that even the bravest monster would think twice about crossing paths. There's also the matter of symbolism. Throughout history, garlic was sometimes seen as a plant of the people, humble, accessible, and yet packing an outsized punch against both disease and evil. It was, in a way, nature's way of leveling the playing field. You didn't need money or powerful magic to protect yourself, just a clove, a little string, and perhaps a tolerant sense of smell. Modern science offers another twist. Garlic really does have antimicrobial properties, thanks to a compound called allicin. People may not have known the chemistry, but they knew results. If it could chase away an infection, why not a vampire? The divide between folk wisdom and science is often a blurry one, especially when the stakes involve life, death, or the undead. But as powerful as garlic was in the imagination of Europe, it even found its way into everyday language. To garlic the enemy meant to put up a strong defense. Even our current expressions, like full of garlic, meaning spirited and bold, have roots in these ancient beliefs. In stories and in kitchens, garlic had an outsized presence. So next time you see a bulb of garlic, know that you're not just looking at another culinary ingredient. You're looking at centuries of fear, hope, ritual, and the eternal struggle between dinner and danger. Is it any surprise that vampires, with their sharp teeth and nighttime escapades, never stood a chance? For every mythic creature of the night, there's always someone, somewhere, with a strong sense of smell and a stronger sense of self-preservation. And maybe, just maybe, a few too many cloves tucked in their coat pocket, just in case. Let me know if you'd like this tweaked further, or need citations woven in. There's been a slight clerical error, you've been buried twice. No big deal, everyone makes mistakes. As it turns out, the best way to make sure you're really, really gone is to do it all over again, sometimes with extra stones just for luck. Double burials might sound like the sort of mix-up that would only happen in the most bureaucratic dystopias, or maybe in sitcoms about haunted graveyards. But they're not as rare as you might wish. Throughout history, grave robbers, shifting town borders, and the ever-changing whims of family dynasties have conspired to make dig them up, dig them in again a surprisingly routine affair. In some cases, the very same person managed to receive the VIP treatment twice, sometimes decades apart, with the added bonus of a brand new tombstone, and maybe a more flattering inscription, once the passage of time had softened a few reputations. Take, for example, the medieval custom of exhumation and reburial, which cropped up whenever a church decided to gussy up its premises. After all, nothing says respect for the departed like relocating them during sanctuary renovations. The remains would be bundled, blessed, and plunked back down in a more prestigious spot, possibly closer to the altar, prime real estate in the afterlife, if you could get it. And if those bones happen to slip into the wrong ossuary, well, who's really keeping score? Of course, not all double burials have been accidental. Some are unequivocally intentional, and, in their own eccentric way, deeply practical. Consider the eternal problem of land scarcity. English churchyards, Italian crypts, and even the famed catacombs beneath Paris have all faced the real estate crunch. Cemetery managers, ever resourceful, adopted a sort of grave recycling system. Older graves were dug up, the remains gathered neatly, sometimes in bundles that were little more than respectfully labeled boxes, and the plot was reused for the next paying resident. If nothing else, it proves that economies of space are truly eternal. But why stop at 2 burials? Sometimes, record-keeping failed so spectacularly that an individual was buried, exhumed, and then promptly lost track of, only to resurface in a completely different grave, years after anyone remembered who they were in the first place. The most enterprising cemeteries offered an unofficial savings, the double burial discount. If your loved one had already been moved once, future relocations came at a reduced rate, charging not for sentimentality but for pure logistical efficiency. In death, as in life, bureaucracy marches on. It's also worth noting that double burials have provided fertile ground, pun intended, for superstition and folklore. In Eastern Europe, for example, a misburied corpse was occasionally deemed suspicious. What if they weren't really dead, but a vampire in hiding? The answer was clear: dig them up, rebury them with extra safeguards, sometimes involving stakes, heavy stones, or even a scattering of seeds to keep restless souls busy counting until dawn. Here, double burial was more than a clerical correction, it was spiritual pest control. Modern archaeology brings a final twist. Forensic teams, armed with spades and administrative forms, routinely discover evidence of successive burials layered atop each other, like so many temporal lasagnas. Each reiteration is a chapter of local history, told through bone, coffin hardware, and whatever personal tokens were included the first, or second, or third time around. So, if you ever worry about things being set in stone after death, rest easy. Your final resting place might just be a temporary layover. After all, why settle for one burial when you could sample the accommodations twice? Grave errors, it turns out, are one of life's few guarantees, and sometimes, if you play your cards right or wrong, you get the second one at half price. Storytelling structure. Conversational and sequential, narratives unfold step by step, often following a logical or chronological order. Opening hook. Each segment usually starts with an attention-grabbing or quirky observation. Concrete details, mixes historical facts, societal context, and vivid imagery. Thematic unity. Each segment has a clear theme or central question guiding the narrative. Callbacks and punchlines, recurring allusions to previously established jokes or facts. Tone. Darkly humorous, eerie or macabre topics balanced with levity and wit. Playful skepticism, challenges superstitions or accepted practices in a sly, tongue-in-cheek manner. Engagingly morbid, a curiosity about uncomfortable or taboo subjects, inviting the audience to join in. Writing style. Personal and direct address, uses you, we, and let's, fostering audience involvement. Metaphors, analogies, and wordplay, clever language that draws unusual comparisons, often flipping expectations. Short, punchy sentences with rhythm, build suspense or lands jokes effectively. Dialogue-style asides and questions, rhetorical questions and imagined conversations create intimacy. Descriptive and sensory language, invokes body sensations, environments, and emotional states. Using this established framework, here's the expanded section 4, 600 words, incorporating your required first paragraph. Feel that gentle pressure? That's not a weighted blanket, it's a coffin lid. In this era, burial comes with a fun plot twist, the very real fear of waking up after the funeral. Hope you're good at charades, because yelling isn't going to cut it when your only audience is a hungry mole. Now, imagine this: you slowly come to, disoriented, in pitch darkness. The silence is total except for the scratching of soil, far too close. Your arms can barely move. No, you haven't joined an escape room for vampires. You're the unlucky star of a very real 18th century horror, being buried alive. Talk about a rude awakening. As morbid as it sounds, this fear wasn't just a gothic fantasy. People across Europe and America were downright obsessed with the possibility, whispering stories of exhumed coffins showing scratch marks, or the caretaker who heard a muffled thumping from 6 feet under. How does a society become this preoccupied with the prospect of accidental burial? Well, it turns out that until the 20th century, distinguishing the dead from the nearly dead was more of an art than a science. Physicians might hold a mirror to your lips or wait for pulse to vanish, but there were plenty of illnesses, catalepsy, cholera, even extreme drunkenness, that could fool even the most attentive doctor. One moment, you're in a swoon. The next, you're being serenaded by worms. Little wonder families begged for reassurance, sometimes insisting a bell be strung to their loved one's wrist, just in case they decided to wake up and stretch. Enter the safety coffin, a coffin with a high-tech feature, and by high-tech we mean a string attached to a bell on the surface, or a pipe designed for fresh air and two-way communication. If you rang that bell, you could theoretically summon the night watchman for a second opinion. The demand for elaborate prevention of premature burial devices exploded. There were patents for escape hatches, spring-loaded lids, and even a flag that would wave to passing gravediggers. No one wanted eternity to be just a clerical error. And let's not gloss over the cultural drama. Newspapers of the day thrived on tales of botched burials, fueling public panic and selling more papers. Made for irresistible reading, especially when real-life cases confirmed everyone's worst suspicions. Doctors published passionate treatises on the need for waiting mortuaries, special rooms where the dead and nearly dead could be kept under observation for days, just to be sure. If you ever doubted the Victorian commitment to being, well, absolutely certain, just look at the lengths to which they went. In some places, they attached a little window to the coffin so the deceased could be checked in on, as if death were just a long, inconvenient nap. Underneath all the odd inventions and dramatic headlines, though, was a universal dread, the loss of agency in your final moments. We like to think we control our destinies, but here, we're at the mercy of caretakers, clerics, and clock-watching doctors. It's a potent reminder that much of the ritual around death is to soothe the living, offering assurances, however flimsy, that such an indignity won't happen to us. Of course, the safety coffin craze eventually subsided, as medicine got better at sorting the living from the dead. But in that twilight era, between science and superstition, the world seemed far less predictable. So, next time you tuck yourself in, be glad your greatest inconvenience is noisy neighbors, not someone accidentally tucking you in forever. In the end, the fear of waking up underground again was less about the coffin and more about the unknown. Just another way we try to whistle past the graveyard, and, if necessary, ring the bell. You take a stroll, by which I mean, shuffle, through the local cemetery. If cemeteries are supposed to be peaceful, then midnight is when they truly lean into the theme, and you begin to understand why sleep-deprived philosophers wrote so much about the nature of silence. The air is thick. Each step crunches on gravel, broadcast at full volume to an audience of, well, presumably just you and your own rattling nerves. When the wind threads itself through the branches and the trees sigh, you can't quite decide whether it's calming or just plain ominous. You take inventory, candle, flickering, shovel, just don't think about why you have it, and the questionably sane belief that this is just another shift. Somewhere in the distance, a stray cat bolts out from behind a tombstone, its eyes reflecting your candle's glow like twin headlights. Your heart conducts a drum solo in your chest. By hour 2, you've settled into the rhythm of the night. Check the perimeter, listen to the secret language of crickets, jump at your own shadow. All the while, there's the unspoken rule of solitude. Why would anyone else be out here? The living generally have better places to be, and the dead, well, you hope they keep to their own side of the divide. It's about this time that your mind starts to play tricks. You replay every horror movie you've ever pretended didn't get to you. What was that shuffling sound near the old willow? Wind, obviously. Unless it wasn't. Did that statue always face that way? Statistically likely, but you make a mental note anyway. Even your thoughts tiptoe, wary of waking anything. The world outside the cemetery, you know, is asleep. Every now and then, an ambulance siren keens from far off, a hollow reminder that life, or whatever passes for it, goes on beyond these iron gates. Meanwhile, here, Your job description becomes increasingly fluid: guardian, philosopher, amateur ghost debunker, main character in your own gothic novella. And there's the occupational hazard of overthinking. What if the real danger isn't ghosts, but twisted ankles from roots you can't see? Or if HR has a form for poltergeist interference, and whether you'd ever want to try explaining that one? You bet the benefits package doesn't cover exorcisms. Still, something curious happens around hour 3. The fear doesn't exactly leave, but it settles, like fog sinking into low ground. Your mind wanders to the names etched in marble, dates that mark entire lifetimes you'll never know. You allow yourself a moment to feel respectfully nosy, imagining who these people were, and who mourned them. If you're poetic, you start to find a strange kinship in this forced quiet, this stoic fellowship of bones, moss, and memory. Then it's back to pacing, gravel underfoot and candle bobbing ahead. Maybe you even get philosophical, pondering why the living are afraid of the dead, but never the other way around. There's an odd comfort in knowing you're the only one here with a cell phone signal. And when your shift finally ends, you step through the rusted gate, back into the world of the sleepless and neon-soaked, half amused that you made it through. After a graveyard night shift, daylight never looked so reassuring, or so complicated. After all, nothing chases after you on your way out, except maybe your own imagination. But that's always been the most persistent ghost of all. Meet your new job, sitting next to graves, listening for the faint tinkle of a string bell. This is unemployment insurance, medieval style. If your neighbor wakes up, you're the one with the dubious pleasure of digging them right back out. It sounds far-fetched, perhaps even a little macabre, but for a brief stretch in European history, bell watcher was a very real occupation. Imagine, no resumes, no LinkedIn profiles, just you, a folding chair, a lantern, and an endless field of uneasy graves. Your primary duty? To guard the silence, ears straining for the feeblest sound that might mean someone below hasn't quite finished their earthly business. The setup was both simple and ingenious, if grim. A thin cord ran from the finger, sometimes the toe, of the recently interred, up through the packed earth and out to a small bell above ground. If the buried party found themselves not as dead as previously advertised, one frantic tug would set the bell dancing. And if you, the watcher, missed that alarm? Well, besides the obvious, there was likely a sharp reprimand from your employer, assuming the formerly deceased person made it out and could give you a piece of their mind. This job wasn't exactly one for the faint-hearted, or the easily bored. By day, you sat, perhaps sipped tepid tea, feeling fairly sure your services wouldn't be called upon. By night, every rustle became suspect. Was it the wind in the graveyard trees? A bored crow? Or was that the tragic pealing of a bell, summoning you to dig, dig, dig before it was too late? Villagers would eye you with a mix of pity and suspicion. Pity, for sitting vigil over the dead. Suspicion, in case your listening involved more napping than vigilance. For centuries, there had been nightmare tales of accidental burial, and a bell watcher's error was seen as both professional and moral failure. Old parish records list fines for watchers caught sleeping, sometimes stories of mothers keeping vigil for their ill children, not trusting the official watcher to stay awake. Occasionally, the watcher's own stories surface, ghostly anecdotes whispered in the inn, of bells that rang without cause, of wind that played tricks, or worse, souls who rang the bell, but too faintly, their salvation lost to the howling dark. Why did this job exist at all? Part superstition, part practical anxiety. Medical knowledge lingered in the dark. Fevers could sink a person into death-like unconsciousness, and no one trusted a doctor's word completely, not when the penalty might be waking up 6 feet under. So towns insured themselves with bell watchers, hoping to catch that rare miracle, or correct a terrifying mistake. In a way, it was an acknowledgement of human error, and perhaps, human hope. Was the job effective? Historians debate. In literature, the phrase "saved by the bell" takes on sudden life, though the actual frequency of miraculous rescues is hard to prove. More often, bell watchers' reports were uneventful and sleep-deprived. Still, those quiet nights were punctuated by the ever-present possibility, the what-if lurking beneath every stone, the ever-latent hope that, in a world of so many uncertainties, even death might be subject to revision. Today, the professional bell watcher is a ghost job, an oddity memorialized in museum displays and local legend. But their work lingers at the edges of our collective imagination, a reminder that with every advance in medicine and every new certainty, there was someone sitting quietly in the dark, just in case the dead weren't quite ready to keep their peace. Why does the old lady next door smell more aggressively garlicky than usual? She's not prepping for a feast, she's prepping for the apocalypse. It's more about keeping local monsters at bay than any culinary ambition. Every village has its character, and in ours, she's the undisputed grand champion. The sort of person who appears to know exactly when you lost your soccer ball over her fence, as if she's been sitting by the window with a running tally of neighborhood infractions. Her eyes follow you, cautiously, disapprovingly, as if a child holding a stick might suddenly conjure a werewolf instead of just poking at snails. It's impossible not to notice the clusters of garlic braids hanging from her window frames, suspended like pungent wind chimes. The front door is barricaded each evening with a meticulously arranged row of bread loaves, just to be sure, she grumbles if asked. For her, a creaking floorboard means more than just a loose nail, it's the herald of something sinister, perhaps a sign that a creature of the night has infiltrated her sanctuary. Neighbors might laugh, but there's always one person at the edge of the gathering, wondering if the old woman knows something they don't. Her garden is less vegetable patch and more cross between a botanical arsenal and a medieval defense system. Not a square inch of soil goes unmanaged. She plants wild dill and bundles of mugwort in careful rows, their leaves poking out like soldiers, each selected for some protective quality passed down through generations. In the evenings, she scatters crushed eggshells in the shape of strange, looping sigils across the gate, muttering old words under her breath. Ask her why, and she'll mumble something vague about making sure nothing gets too curious, though whether she means pests, thieves, or otherworldly visitors is never clarified. There's an economy to her suspicion, a private ritual of vigilance. The village whispers about her odd habits, but they never truly forget who she is, the living memory of the village's stories, its superstitions made solid in the form of pickled beets and salted fish jars stacked high under her stairs. Every action, every precaution, feels deliberate and steeped in narrative. Garlic to keep away the vampire, silver spoon hanging by the window to confuse shapeshifters, a bowl of black salt by the threshold for bad spirits. It's as if the whole house is a fortress designed against the supernatural, a stern rebuke to all those cocky enough to cross her path uninvited. These days, the old lady isn't just the village eccentric, she's an oracle of sorts. New mothers stop by for a branch of her rosemary when their babies are sick. Teenagers, pretending not to believe, dare each other to knock on her door after sunset. And when the wind howls a little too darkly through the trees, even grown men glance nervously in her direction, half expecting her to emerge with a cryptic warning. Of course, there are stories, always stories. The time the cat went missing and was found, days later, sleeping contentedly in her lap. The summer of the bad harvest, when only her tomato survived, and no one could say why. In weighty silences, people admit they're glad she's around, garlic and all. Because in a world where monsters once lurked in every shadow, a little suspicion is a useful trait. Maybe her rituals aren't about monsters at all. Maybe they're about keeping the past alive, about remembering that the world is a strange, unpredictable place best met with equal parts skepticism and salt. So next time you pass her house, windows foggy with the steam of simmering herbs, threshold lined with garlic like a dare, consider giving her a polite nod. She's not warding off monsters, really. She's keeping the village's fears at bay, one herb bundle at a time. You hear rumors, someone saw old Thomas wandering after his own funeral, or so they claim. People don't call him a zombie, they call him reanimated, which is less catchy but scarily plausible in the local tavern gossip. But around here, rumors stick tighter than wet leaves to your boots. Everyone knows someone who swears they saw Thomas trailing down the lane, his eyes empty but his gait agonizingly familiar. There's a collective unease that settles over the town like a cold fog, and it buzzes loudest in the places folks gather, the general store, the candlelit corners of the tavern, and especially near the cemetery gates after nightfall. You never see people linger there anymore, not since the stories started. Folks try to pass it off as simple superstition. People see what they want to see, says Mrs. Marrow, who's old enough to have outlived most of her friends and a few rumors, too. Yet when someone finds boot prints in soft earth near a fresh grave, print shapes that look a little too much like Thomas's worn-out work boots, even the skeptics fall silent. There's something about the footprints, The way they wander right up to the church fence, and then disappear, as if whoever, or whatever, made them simply walked off into thin air. No one dares use the Z word. Zombies are for faraway stories, foreign troubles with names you can't pronounce. Here, the stories are local, close to the bone. Reanimated is what you whisper, usually with a sideways glance, because it sounds almost clinical, like an unfortunate diagnosis or an unexplained symptom. In truth, it's just enough distance to make it bearable to talk about. Less movie monster, more personal nightmare. And that's why the fear smolders slowly rather than exploding. It's not like you're dealing with a horde thumping at your door. Instead, there's a creeping dread, an idea that maybe Thomas, or someone like him, could simply decide to come home one night, sit quietly in his favorite rocking chair, and wait for morning. Maybe he'd still know how to open doors. Maybe he'd recognize the wallpaper. Maybe he'd even remember your name. Children start skipping close your eyes games, just in case the dead can see through closed eyelids. The baker, who used to joke about losing bread to thieving raccoons, boards up his pantry from the inside now. It sounds absurd, but when enough people believe, actions change. Old traditions, salt scattered on the doorstep, iron nails left in windowsills, dogs sleeping indoors, become new rituals. Rituals that feel necessary, even if no one admits why. All of this bubbles beneath the placid surface of daily life. People still go about their errands, but with a watchful tension. Conversations trail off when someone unfamiliar enters the room. If anyone inquires about Thomas's house, the reply is a pointed silence, followed by a sudden change of subject, best not to tempt fate. Privately, everyone has questions they never ask out loud. What if reanimation isn't a fluke but a symptom of something spreading quietly in the soil, or in the air? What if tomorrow it's not Thomas, but you or someone you love? The fear is not of monsters, but of the possibility that death is no longer the definitive end, that the line between here and gone might be thinner than the town ever believed. At night, lights burn a little longer in windows, and curtains are pulled tight. In the distance, an animal might yelp or a branch might snap. Most nights, it's nothing. But on the rare occasions when the moon is just a sliver and the wind carries the scent of earth and smoke, the old fears stir again. Are the stories just stories? Or is someone really out there, walking, searching, just beyond the edge of sight? No one knows. And nobody, not even the bravest soul in town, is willing to find out. Tonight's innovation, smaller, but crucial, breathing tubes built into coffins. Early ventilation, a little engineering and a lot of wishful thinking, just in case you want to turn your own funeral into the ultimate escape room. Let's rewind the clock to the 18th and 19th centuries. Picture a creeping societal anxiety, the fear of being buried alive. This wasn't just fodder for Gothic novels or overactive imaginations. Many medical diagnoses of the time were just guesses in the dark. Comas, epilepsy, catalepsy, and a host of misunderstood conditions led to all too frequent cases of premature burial. Newspapers published chilling tales of exhumed coffins containing claw marks, skeletons tangled in desperate contortions, and one persistent worry echoed through Europe. What if you woke up underground, closed in, and realized it wasn't death that had been so final, but only the mistake of the living? Inventors rose to the occasion, but rather than devising ways to avoid illness or confirm death with science, they dug ingeniously, if morbidly, into the coffins themselves. Enter the patent for coffins with air holes, a modest, practical alteration to that ultimate wooden capsule. A crude pipe, often just tin or iron, would pierce the earth, theoretically allowing fresh air to filter down to a sleeper, should he or she awake on the wrong side of eternity. Sometimes a whistle, bell, or flag would be perched at head height, tethered by a string to the would-be occupant's hand. But it was the ventilation that was given pride of place, as if a deep, panicked gasp of air would somehow be the cue for rescue. But let's talk about the design. These tubes were rarely more than a couple inches in diameter, snaking from the head or mouth of the deceased up to the surface. Intriguingly, a handful of 19th-century inventors touted these apparatuses as health measures, arguing that fresh air staved off decomposition. Of course, technology alone doesn't soothe the imagination. There's an inherent drama in the prospect of air holes, the desperation to breathe, the claustrophobia of the sealed box, the hope for salvation somehow wending its way down a narrow tunnel of pipe. The public imagination seized on these details. Victorian horror stories pulsed with references to the safety coffin, the bell that might ring in the stillness of the night, and the air that might carry a final desperate scream. It was part engineering, part psychological comfort, offering mourners the illusion that, even in death, their loved ones had one last chance. Naturally, the effectiveness of such coffins is debatable. Would they actually save someone mistakenly interred? Physics gives us reason for skepticism. 6 feet of earth is heavy. Air doesn't flow freely into tightly packed soil, and if one truly awoke inside a coffin, panic would likely set in long before fresh air could make a difference. Yet for those living at the time, that thin column of metal or wood stood as a symbol of hope against a backdrop of overwhelming dread, a fighting chance, however slim. The coffins with air holes are a curious mix of real innovation and dramatic overstatement. They represent an intersection of fear, compassion, and the optimism that, given even an inch, literally, humanity might claw its way back from the grave. In our era, the very idea seems like darkly comic overkill, the main ingredient in a bleeding heart magic trick. Yet these inventions echo today, not only in stories and horror films, but in the way we use technology to insulate ourselves from existential fears, one clever gadget or hopeful loophole at a time. Even as today's burial practices trend toward the ecological and the minimalist, there's something touching about these old air holes, a final nod, perhaps, to the possibility that there's always one more breath left to take, and always one more escape to imagine. There's life insurance, and then there's this one be the last you see of me insurance. Entire families invest in garlic wreaths, holy water, and awkward wooden stakes. Just the basics, really, for anyone who's ever lost sleep with a creaky attic. But what if your concern isn't just a bump in the night, but a full-on late-night visitation from Uncle Gregory, who refuses to stay buried? Enter the lucrative, peculiar world of vampire insurance policies, a market as niche as it is necessary, or at least, that's what the brochures claim. Underwriters, dressed more like medieval hunters than actuaries, take your calls from candlelit offices where every incoming policy applicant requires not just a signature, but a blood sample, purely for research reasons, or so they say. Most policies start simple: coverage for property damage by the undead. Smashed windows? That's a Class 2 claim, provided you saved a fang as evidence. Did a bat-shaped shadow cross your bedroom wall and swipe your prized vinyl collection? Many would say that's just a house cat on a rogue mission, but it's better safe than sorry. Send in your audio evidence of the hissing, and you might see a partial reimbursement. It's hardly a secret, premiums are steep. 2 in most policies, right between werewolf vandalism and banshee noise complaints. The application process itself is something of a community event. Grannies in shawls gather at the local parish hall for the monthly policy prep and pancakes, armed with notarized family trees and stout gloves for those inevitable wooden stake demonstrations. Then there's the liability waiver. Those who sleepwalk must sign an extra addendum confirming they won't be mistaken for revenants in the small hours. Vampires, it turns out, value plausible deniability as much as any claims adjuster. After all, no one wants the public scandal of a false fang filing. Let's not forget the optional riders. The sunrise safeguard pays out if you survive until dawn, while the popular reflection rebate offers partial refunds on antique mirrors if you can prove they no longer show your in-laws. For those with higher risk tolerance, or a castle with too many turrets, there's the comprehensive Nosferatu no-fault plan, full restitution for garlic-induced allergies, holy water stains, and accidental stake mishaps, complete with no questions asked talisman replacement. And naturally, marketing is half the business. Brochures feature happy families barbecuing, safe from marauding fiends thanks to their robust coverage. Nighttime open houses become vampire awareness seminars, with nuns on retainer and a registered phlebotomist at every meet and greet. It's a curious sight, policy representatives swapping actuarial tables for crucifixes, quoting premium rates while slipping you a complimentary bulb of garlic. Critics call it a racket, of course. Every town has one skeptic who points out that the only bites around here come from the local mosquitoes, which, it must be admitted, display troubling levels of persistence. But every now and then, the moon rises just right, and an inexplicable rustling comes from the family plot. That's when folks are glad their signature is on file, even if they suspect the real beneficiary is the plucky notary who never misses a meeting. Ultimately, Vampire insurance policies are less about proving the existence of the unnatural, and more about comforting the naturally anxious. Because when the sun goes down and the shadows get long, it's less about actuarial science, and more about peace of mind, plus a garage full of garlic, just in case. After all, a little superstition, neatly itemized and underwritten, goes a long way toward a good night's sleep. And if your attic ever does creak in just the wrong way, don't worry, you're covered. You take up the community tradition, occasionally checking on graves. Not out of respect, but to make sure nothing is moving, because here, rest in peace is more of a polite suggestion. Patrolling the cemetery at night isn't as creepy as it sounds, at least not at first. You get used to the crunch of boots over frosted grass, the way your breath rises in clouds, how the moonlight makes the old markers sinister and somehow cartoonish. You wrap your scarf tighter, shovel slung over your shoulder, both for utility and comfort. The townsfolk say if you see fresh dirt, or, worse, disturbed dirt, it's your responsibility to tidy up. Best to keep the boundary clear, Mr. Whitlow, the grizzled groundskeeper, mutters anytime he hands out tools. People picture graveyards as serene or gothic, places of quiet mourning. In Mallow's End, they're closer to a second living room for the dead, with the living cast as uneasy caretakers. You walk row after row, tracing familiar names etched in time-worn stone. There's a pattern to life and death here, and disruption never bodes well. Security in this place is not just about keeping vandals out. Everyone knows that. It's about shoveling, literally. The earth is restive, inexplicably so. Sometimes, you come across small mounds where there weren't any before, or a handprint imprinted in loamy soil. Those are the moments when your breath hastens and you mutter the old prayers, not for anyone's soul, but for your own safety. No one admits to being scared. Of course not. But when dawn lingers, you find more than one lantern left burning at the gate overnight, its flame quivering in the pre-dawn cold. The bravado lasts right until you have to flick on your flashlight and check Mrs. Delaney's plot, the one rumored to twitch when nobody's looking. You swallow embarrassment, kneel and pat the ground, muscles tense. No movement. A sigh. Maybe a nervous laugh, if you're lucky. These midnight vigils aren't assigned, but everyone knows when it's their turn. It's understood that keeping the dead down is a group effort. Nobody wants to do it alone, but doing it together brings a strange sort of comfort. Sometimes, you pass your neighbor, shovel-toting like yourself, both of you nodding without a word and pretending that you're out for an ordinary stroll. The local children invent games around the tradition, a tiptoeing version of tag played between the stones, winners declared bravest if they dare to touch the oldest grave. The old-timers shake their heads and swear under their breath, but in truth, they started as children doing the same things. The games just got more serious as they grew. There are stories whispered in the dusk, warnings passed down with the shovel's heft. The time the earth trembled after the first frost, the year-old Mayor Pratt's grave needed triple packing. The December someone found footprints, the wrong kind, leading away from the mausoleum. Each tale underscores a single, unchanging fact. The dead in Mallow's End keep up with community traditions, too, in their own quiet way. Some would call it superstition, others might call it pragmatism. But in a town where the line between above and below is soft as peat, shoveling for security is just as routine as locking your doors at night. It's an uneasy peace, and you're one of its keepers, like generations before you. By morning, the cemetery seems harmless again, only a patchwork of stones and sun-drenched grass. The odd chill at your neck fades, and the memory of nocturnal duty dissolves into daytime chores. Still, at the next dusk, you'll tuck your shovel under your arm and walk the rows once more, careful to not let your footsteps linger too long near any one plot, just in case someone, or something, has decided the boundaries aren't as final as they used to be. Local priests aren't just here to bless bread. Sometimes they're called out at midnight, shovel in hand, ready to reconsecrate a grave that just won't stay still. It's hard to think of a job you can be summoned for more begrudgingly than a midnight graveyard visit, especially when the phone rings right as the priest is slipping into bed. There's no overtime pay for banishing a restless shade or sanctifying a plot that seems to have developed, let's call it, ambitions of its own. Sometimes it's because old Mrs. Nolan, walking her dog at a ghastly hour, claimed she saw lights winking between the headstones, and refused to ever walk that path again, which is saying something in a village where every shortcut passes 3 ghosts and a shadowy tree. The priest's first task isn't anything written in the liturgy. It's crowd control, calming down the shaking groundskeeper, assuring the sleepless relatives that sometimes the earth settles, and, if the night is particularly wild, placating the handful of rubberneckers peering over the fence, hoping something interesting will crawl out. In a world so hungry for distraction, even the undead have to compete for attention. But here's where the ritual starts: a shovel passed down, altar wine left in the thermos, muttered prayers half remembered from seminary days. The priest digs. The ground, wet and stubborn, yields only a few inches before reminding him just how far his everyday shoes are from work boots. But to dig, that is the rite. Sometimes the moment becomes genuinely eerie. The silence presses in, the shovel's dull scrape bounces off headstones. Even priests admit, decades later, that certain places feel colder, like a breathless pause between worlds. Still, the ritual continues. The priest recites the prayers, his breath blooming in the cold air, as much to comfort himself as to appease the unseen. Every handful of earth, every sprinkle of holy water, every whispered Latin phrase knits the fabric between the living and the dead just a little tighter. In these moments, the priest becomes part detective, part therapist, part spiritual janitor. He listens for the things that aren't said, unspoken grief, local legends that refuse to lie down. Sometimes a family will accompany him, their torches flickering, looking not just for reassurance but for closure, a subtle negotiation with their own memories, as much as any restless spirit. "Thank you, Father," they whisper, relief spreading as the last shovelful is tamped down, as if faith alone could seal any gap. When dawn threatens the horizon and the priest returns his shovel to its place, there remains one final task: writing a diplomatically vague note for the parish records. No mention of the shudders, the silent fears, the brief flicker of doubt. Only the tidy language of the living, smoothing over another night when the sleeping village wrestled, for a while, with what it can't quite forget or let go. So, next time you see a priest in the daylight, tie askew, mud on his shoes, remember, he isn't just fighting sin. He's out there, midnight shoveler, standing guard at the edges where stories try to climb back out of their graves. Tonight, as you try to doze off, someone starts sharing the latest tale about Farmer Bill's second return. Bedtime stories are less about sheep, more about sheep who look suspiciously pale. These nightly ghost stories have become their own tradition in our community, a curious hybrid of comfort and thrill. Every evening, as the lights are dimmed and the wind presses like a soft hand against the windows, the stage is set. The room grows quieter, but within that hush, anticipation trembles. No one says it out loud, but we're all waiting for the tale, the slow and sly entrance of something not quite from this world. It's never just a story, it's a collective ritual, anchoring us to each other as much as to the uncanny. The teller tonight knows exactly what they're doing. There's a wooden chair that everyone seems to gravitate toward, and whoever claims it finds their voice stretching to fill the shadowy corners. The formula never changes much, but somehow that's the charm. Farmer Bill, a fixture of living memory and spectral gossip, has apparently risen again, this time with stranger habits, perhaps a slightly different hat, or a new fondness for rearranging tools in the old barn. Each retelling shifts a detail, and each detail is weighed and judged by the rapt audience, who know Farmer Bill better than their own relatives. The pale sheep join the ranks of supporting characters, another local flavor. Whispered questions drift through the dark. Did anyone else notice the flock lingering by the gate long after sunset? Was it the moonlight making them look odd, or something more peculiar? The questions linger, unlatching the imagination. Eyes stay open, alert to the creak of floorboards or the flutter of curtains. There's a strange comfort in these ghostly interruptions of nightly routine. Wrapped in blankets, you sense that the line between waking and dreaming has thinned. The story begins to loop and coil in your thoughts, your mind playing with the idea: what if Farmer Bill really is out there, somewhere between rows of corn, making his quiet rounds? No matter how outlandish the stories get, no one questions why we keep spinning them. On some level, we need them. They bind the day's chaos together, offering a thread of continuity. Tomorrow, the details will be debated over breakfast, laughter competing with the memory of genuine unease. The boundaries between fear and fun blur until they almost vanish. Children, of course, are both most skeptical and most susceptible. Some clutch stuffed animals, eyes wide. Others smirk, convinced it's all an adult plot to postpone chores. But even the most cynical find themselves glancing, just to be safe, into the corners before drifting off. Adults, meanwhile, pretend composure. They construct practical explanations, just wind in the attic, or moonlight through the old stained glass. Yet, after the lights go out, even they listen for footsteps on gravel, just in case. In the end, these ghost stories say as much about us as they do about whatever haunts our fields and dreams. The tales change with the times. Last winter it was flickering lights, this spring it's garden tools that move themselves, but the purpose remains the same. In telling and retelling, we negotiate our worries and our hopes, the line between the things we can control and those we can only imagine. So, as you lie in bed, the story reverberates, not a warning but an invitation. To listen, to imagine, to share in the low warmth of collective suspense. It's a ghost story, yes, but it's also something older and deeper, a way of saying, we're in this together, wherever the night might lead us. The sheep may be pale, Farmer Bill unpredictable, but in the space between fear and laughter, we find our way toward morning. As you inspect your bedside table, you notice today's essentials: garlic, crucifix, maybe a pigeon skull. People stick with what works, or at least what hasn't failed spectacularly yet. But these hastily assembled artifacts, relics of superstition or convenient armory, are rarely as reliable as their legends promise. For every hard-nosed skeptic, there's a true believer thrusting a rosary into the gnashing jaws of the undead, just to find out that sentimental jewelry won't stop a determined flesh-eater. Still, hope is powerful, and desperation even more so. Survivors reach for whatever is at hand, layering old wives' tales with modern ingenuity, hoping for the combination that buys a few more hours of safety in the dark. Let's begin with weaponry, the kind that separates the practical from the fanciful. It's not elegant, but it is effective, and no battery malfunctions or ammo shortages are likely to render it useless. The logic is simple: keep the tool close, keep the range close, and accept that rescue is probably not coming. Accompanying the closer is the ever-adaptable bicycle helmet, now more valuable than gold. With jaws snapping at your brain, padding is king. The helmet ranks above holy symbols and talismans, because while faith may comfort the soul, only a well-placed piece of polycarbonate deters zombie teeth. Crowbars aside, chemical deterrents have ascended the DIY throne. Chili oil, ammonia, and even the contents of long-forgotten perfume bottles have been hurled in the faces of the infected, with decidedly mixed results. There's a certain poetry in trying to blind death with eau de toilette, but no actual science. One survivor group swears by a concoction of menthol and vinegar, applied liberally to collars and cuffs, which may be more useful in disguising your own panic than repelling the undead. Still, every ritual has its purpose. Sometimes, it's simply to keep hands busy while waiting for dawn. Then there are the psychological reinforcements, the talismans of memory and meaning. People who once rolled eyes at lucky rabbits' feet now tie them to shoelaces, while shared urban legends spread as fast as any virus. Zombies hate lemons, claims one radio host, inspiring listeners to carry citrus at all times. The ritual is less about efficacy and more about control, a way to thumb your nose at fear and reclaim 10 square centimeters of certainty in a rapidly shrinking world. Every anti-zombie toolkit is equal part weapon, shield, and comfort item. It's important to note that toolkits aren't just for the living. The dead have their preferences, too, or at least, the people preparing for their own possible infection do. Emergency packs now come equipped with notes for loved ones, instructions on how to chain a body before reanimation, and, in one memorable case, a harmonica. "If I start playing, you'll know it's time," the note read. In a world where losing your humanity is the ultimate terror, signaling your own end can be the last act of agency. And, of course, there's the wild proliferation of anti-zombie apparel: duct-taped sleeves, gloves reinforced with thumbtacks, scarves soaked in garlic-infused oil. Whether or not these accessories provide real security, they function as badges of resilience and solidarity, a kind of patchwork armor against despair. In some safe zones, zombie fashion shows have become an annual event, where survivors strut their latest innovations in bite prevention. It's absurd, yes, but sometimes absurdity is the best defense against overwhelming odds. In the end, the true anti-zombie toolkit isn't found in the things you carry, but the rituals and relationships you build around them. In the face of relentless threat, it's not just sharp tools or lucky charms, it's conviction, community, and the refusal to go quietly into the night. The best dressed are the best defended. Black clothing hides dirt, but nothing hides garlic breath. Garlic has always played an outsized, almost glamorous, role in our rituals. Once just another item in Grandma's kitchen, it has become a powerful statement at moments of loss. At funerals, style doesn't just mean looking good, it means smelling intimidating. Why do mourners lather themselves with such layers of garlic? Because old superstitions never really die, they just get accessorized. Today's mourner might march into the wake in sleek black silk, but you can bet that there's a string of garlic bulbs swinging from her wrist like a designer clutch. Not just a deterrent for vampires, garlic carries a special place in funeral tradition. 1 part armor, 2 parts perfume. Imagine the scent wafting through the air, hints of mourning, robust garlicky bravado, and just a pinch of collective paranoia. These aren't tears of grief, they're tears caused by the sheer potency of your seatmate's garlic scarf. The real showstopper isn't what you wear, but what you reek of. It's an olfactory arms race. As the mourners gather, you notice every variant of garlic couture on display. Cousin Francesca ups for subtlety, a tasteful brooch shaped like a clove, pinned to her lapel. Meanwhile, Uncle Vito, never a fan of nuance, drapes a double helix rope of braided garlic around his neck like heavyweight championship bling. There's always one fashion-forward cousin who arrives wearing garlic earrings and a matching anklet, setting off metal detectors and glares from those with sensitive noses. But it's not just about accessories. The truly prepared take their defense to the next level, soaking shirts in garlic-infused water days in advance. By the buffet, you'll find Aunt Carla stubbornly munching raw garlic cloves, citing both tradition and doctor's orders as she deftly avoids small talk and any uninvited ghosts that might be hovering by the deviled eggs. The logic behind this tradition has layers as complex as a clove itself. First, it's believed that garlic wards off restless spirits who might otherwise latch onto mourners during vulnerable times. In practice, it has the handy side effect of discouraging nosy neighbors from getting too close. You grieve in peace, and with personal space. Some say the custom began in a time when hygiene was uncertain and superstitions loomed large, but now it carries a certain gravitas, an unspoken code. Today, we remember the dearly departed. Of course, each family interprets the dress code a little differently. Some hand out sachets of dried garlic at the door, the way other funerals might distribute programs or prayer cards. Children protest, loudly, at garlicky face paint, but even they seem to sense the weight of the moment, smudging it hastily across their cheeks like war paint before running to the dessert table. The elders nod approvingly, their approval muffled under layers of cloves. Yet, despite the bitter dares and dubious glances, this ritual brings its own comfort. Mourning is a strange and lonely thing, but the shared, outrageous gesture of garlic fashion draws everyone closer, even if, paradoxically, nobody wants to stand too near. When words fail, it's the shared stink that says, "We are here together, remembering and protecting, laughing in the face of the unknown." So next time you attend a funeral in this community, rest assured, fashion is fiercely functional, tradition is pungently alive, and the true mark of respect is not what you wear on your sleeve, but what you bravely wield on your breath. Because on days like these, it is better to arrive over-prepared, aromatically armored, and ready to outstink the shadows. Neighborhood kids are oddly enthusiastic about grave-related relay games. Winner gets first dibs on the unearthed coins, second place avoids last night's ghost sighting. The tradition goes something like this. After homework, but before the streetlights flicker on, double knots are tied in battered sneakers and shovels appropriated from unsuspecting sheds. A patch of grass in the older part of the cemetery, the section so ancient the names have surrendered to lichen, becomes the field of honor and negotiation. Teams are hastily sorted by a squabble over whose cousin saw the strangest omen this week. If you can prove you heard the phantom bell toll at midnight, you're automatically team captain. The course is simple, improvised from memory and rumor. Dig as fast as you can, but never in a straight line. This, supposedly, is to confuse any lurking souls planning vengeance from beneath. Markers, usually scuffed plastic army men and repurposed dental floss flags, define the start and finish. No one, under any circumstances, is allowed to touch the big slate stone at the north corner, as that is where the rumored headless caretaker naps during storms. The race begins with a shouted countdown and a ceremonial tossing of a plastic jack-o'-lantern. Shovels hit the soil in frenzied unison. The digging is not elegant. Small hands slip on wooden handles, turn up more roots than relics. Rocks are declared cursed with gleeful certainty. A bent bottle cap becomes a pirate's doubloon. The air crackles not just with competitive tension, but the unspoken dare. Could someone really disturb something better left buried tonight? Spectators, siblings too small or too chicken to play, cheer from a safe distance, invoking past legends. They swear last year's runner-up saw glowing eyes in the tool shed, or that the soil turns cold where buried marbles sleep. Teasing is sharp yet oddly affectionate. No one forgets the time Eli tripped over a shoelace, unearthing an entire bird skeleton that he insisted was an omen of eternal luck. Victors claim their treasure, a stash of rain-dulled coins, marbles smoothed by decades of idle waiting, once a silver ring with a cracked blue stone. These rewards are swiftly pocketed or, for the truly brave, reburied for next week's race, another attempt to one-up the past and tempt the local spirits anew. The losers, meanwhile, shiver and boast that second place is safer anyway. After all, the whispers say the ghost only tags winners, following them home in the shape of a shadow stretched thin in the moonlight. When the game ends, there is an unspoken truce. Shovels are cleaned and quietly returned, fresh dirt brushed from knees and elbows. The group lingers, stories swelling as darkness creeps in. One kid claims to have dug up a coin so old it has no face, a bad sign, everyone agrees, and a strong excuse to adjourn to the safety of porch lights and cocoa. Tomorrow, someone will propose a new rule, blindfold races, or a scavenger hunt for the oldest bone. Adults, if they ever notice the small upturned plots, mutter about kids these days, but never too loudly. After all, some legends are better left unchallenged, and nobody wants to be the one who accidentally offends the headless caretaker. In the vocabulary of this neighborhood, childhood is measured not in years but in the number of graveyard games survived, in the whispered details of what was found, and how quickly you could run with a shadow on your heels. Evening finds you at the local tavern, where discussing burial techniques is a competitive sport. The loudest argument isn't about taxes, it's about whether triple burying really works. This is not a quiet gathering. It's less a discussion and more a cacophony of hard opinions hurled across tables sticky with spilled ale. You can tell by the animated gestures and occasional thrown bread rolls that people here care far more about stopping vengeful ghosts than funding the constable's new horse. At the center table sits Agnes, whose own uncle once rose 3 times despite the best efforts of the parish gravedigger. She holds the floor, figuratively and occasionally literally, as she tends to stand up on benches when impassioned. The first time, she says, they just put him under, a simple affair. 2 nights later, there's his muddy foot at the window. The second time, they packed him in with heavy stones. Her audience is rapt. Everyone knows the importance of getting burial etiquette right. Superstition is the silent guest at every family supper, the unseen hand guiding even the most rational neighbor's actions. The rules have evolved into a social code, enforced as much by side-eye and rumor as by any official edict. In this tavern, there are as many burial techniques as there are patrons. Harold, a usually quiet blacksmith, pounds his fist and declares, "Triple bury if you must, but put the body with its face to the wall." The apothecary scoffs. His method involves an elaborate series of counterclockwise circles and a pouch of salt. As plates are cleared and tankards refilled, it slowly becomes clear that nobody truly expects these methods to work. That's not really the point. Arguing over who has the most foolproof burial strategy is how you demonstrate your belonging. To scoff outright at these stories would be social suicide. It's far safer, and much more enjoyable, to invent ever more convoluted rituals. Betty from the mill offers, "When my cousin passed, we made him a coffin from an elder tree, and nailed it shut with iron." This is met with nods of approval, but also quiet mutters. Everyone knows iron stings ghosts, but elder wood? That's new. Within a week, at least half the funerals in town will feature a branch or two of elder. Why take chances? Underneath all this raucous debate lies something else, something unspoken. In a world where mortal danger lurks at every turn, from fever, famine, and the feuds of the powerful, the idea that a proper ritual might shield you from restless spirits is strangely comforting. It weaves the community together, giving everyone a role to play, from gravedigger to gossip to stern-faced elder reciting the old charms under their breath. As the night wears on, the stories become taller, the laughter louder. Yet every so often, when the wind rattles the shutters, voices drop, eyes dart toward the darkness beyond the door. For all the bravado, the fear of the unruly dead, that sense that the world is brittle, and the boundary between life and whatever comes next is too easily breached, lingers beneath the merriment. And anyway, it's much easier to argue about the best way to keep the dead in their graves than to admit that nobody wants to be the next one whose relatives have to find out. So the tavern keeps the rituals alive, night after night, in the warm glow of candlelight, superstition, sustained as much by laughter and storytelling as by genuine dread. Tomorrow, with hangovers and fresh rumors, they'll do it all again. And if new techniques are invented, double wrapping the corpse in linens, painting protective sigils, burying a potato in each pocket, well, who's to say they won't work? Back at home, the local healer comes by for regular visits, not to cure you, but to make sure you're still alive. Overly rosy cheeks are cause for a polite poke, maybe a discreet sniff. If you're lucky, these visits are simply routine, the clatter of the healer's walking stick on the floorboards, a cheery inquiry about your appetite, a not-so-casual glance at your eyes and skin. Still among the living, I see, they say, half joking, half grim. But there's a silent subtext. The healer isn't there just to help out with a stubborn cough or a suspicious mole. No, there's a checklist being silently ticked. Are your digits unusually cold? Are your breaths too shallow, your eyelids waxy? Because no one wants a repeat of that one time. You know, the time old Bert was sent off in the family shroud, then started pounding on the coffin lid mid-funeral. This is the age of open fires and drafty stone corridors, when a winter fever or a bout of food poisoning can render you insensible for days. And who wants to risk waking up in pitch-black wood, with nothing but a faded bouquet and cousin Mildred sobbing nearby? The healer's duties, therefore, include sniff tests for the truly daunting, and, sometimes, for the prideful. If you're an especially well-preserved elderly uncle, you'll need to prove that your skin isn't just well moisturized, but circulates blood that's still warm. Breath on a mirror. Hold a feather under your nose. Wiggle your toes for the nice lady. Families, of course, treat these visits with an odd mixture of embarrassment and relief. No one wants to suggest that grandmother might be passing on, but they also don't want to risk a premature send-off. It's one of those unspoken village anxieties, the sort you only joke about when the fires are low and the night winds howling. In the meantime, every snore or suspiciously deep nap is cause for concern. More than one teenager has been prodded awake by a nervous parent, just in case. There's ceremony even in the check itself. The signs of sure death are a matter of local folklore and family expertise. Is that a fading of the earlobe? A curious stiffness in the fingers? Sometimes, it's simply an ineffable look. The healer sees it, the family feels it, but no one can quite describe it. And so the healer is called, and another round of judgment is pronounced. You might think all this anxiety would fade as medical knowledge advanced, but the opposite is often true. The more people know of the diseases that can leave you comatose, the more checks are added. There are tales of neighbors being laid out on the kitchen table for 3 days straight, just in case. Bells with strings tied to fingers, a popular import from the city, make their sporadic entrance for the truly paranoid. More than one healer has been chided for being overzealous in their poking, especially when the dead have a tendency to grumble. All of it adds up to a strange kind of intimacy, a community decision about when it's time to say goodbye. The healer's final word is respected, but sometimes, just sometimes, a lingering doubt sends the family back for one last check, when the room is empty and the shadows long across the floor. So, in this world, you get used to seeing death twice, once in the eyes of your kin, and again, in the form of the healer bent over you, searching for whatever sign remains. Double-checked, yes, but it's the living who double-check the most. Just to be sure. If you have further details or want a specific anecdote inserted, please let me know. Doctors insist they can spot a real corpse from a faker. You have doubts, especially since your cousin Marion keeps waking up mid-funeral and demanding breakfast. You may joke about Marion's taste for drama, but the sometimes dead have a long, if not exactly proud, history. Once, in foggy old London, being declared dead was as ordinary as catching a cold. Except occasionally, the diagnosis was about as accurate. The 18th century worried itself half to death, so to speak, about being buried alive. Coffin makers made brisk business customizing escape hatches, breathing tubes, and dinner bells. Ring this in the event of resurrection, please and thank you. That era's ambiguous mortality gave rise to the charming term suspended animation, which manages to make not breathing sound like a spa treatment. You could be a live corpse, simply paused, not obsolete. Sometimes, a well-timed thunderclap or the scent of vinegar under the nose, Victorian first aid, roused the apparently dead back to the land of tea and inconvenience. Modern medicine scoffs at such melodrama, armed with pulse oximeters and heart monitors. But even today, the line between life and death flickers like a faulty fluorescent tube. Consider the rare but well-documented cases of Lazarus syndrome, the spontaneous return of circulation after failed resuscitation, which tends to inspire both awe and extensive paperwork. In 2007, a woman in Venezuela astonished both her mortician and her family when she blinked awake on the autopsy slab, bandaged and baffled by all the fuss. Death, it seems, does not always keep appointments. Of course, the sometimes dead often end up explaining themselves at great length to startled bureaucrats, hospital staff, and, occasionally, the police. In 2014, a Mississippi man clawed his way out of a body bag after 12 hours in the local morgue cooler, naked, cold, remarkably polite, and probably reconsidering his choice of retirement home. Science now knows enough to be uncomfortable. States like catalepsy, deep hypothermia, or diabetic coma can trick even the bossiest ER resident. Add to that the artificial twilight of induced hypothermia, a deliberate cooling down to slow metabolism, performed in emergency rooms worldwide, and it's clear that you shouldn't spring for the extra fancy casket until you're really sure. Why are we so bad at drawing the line? In part, because the human body is full of surprises. Nerves fire unexpectedly, hearts restart with just the right jolt, and sometimes, somewhere in the brain, the engine coughs and sputters its way back to life. Even machines can be fooled. Pacemakers may tick on involuntarily, leading paramedics to mistake hardware for heartbeat. So when the doctor pronounces someone definitely, absolutely, please no more questions dead, recall that medical certainty is more conditional than most warranties. The truth is, you could be one spectacular nap away from a scandalous reappearance at your own wake. And as for Marion, maybe you should just pack a sandwich, tuck in a flashlight, and schedule her next revival for after breakfast. Just in case. Once in a while, all this fear leads to something awkward, like digging up the wrong grave. But hey, at least you all get a laugh about it later, after everyone's heart rate recovers. It's funny how, when nerves are running high and darkness presses in, your brain turns the simplest task into a monumental challenge. You're clutching your flashlight, sweating through your shirt, hoping against hope that this time everything will go smoothly. Instantly, the adrenaline spikes and everyone freezes, like kids caught sneaking cookies at midnight. Now, you'd think after years of this, people would learn to double-check before breaking out the shovels. But there's a kind of collective amnesia that sets in after midnight. Plot numbers, landmarks, suddenly none of it matches up. You start to realize how easy it is to make simple mistakes in the high-stakes, low-light world of graveyards. There's always that one anxious friend who suggests, let's just check one more time. But it's too late, the first scoop of earth is already flying. The damp smell of soil and moss fills the air, while every distant hoot and rustle makes you pause and squint into the darkness. That's when the doubts really start to work their magic. The only thing louder than your beating heart is the running commentary from the group. And then, of course, comes the moment of realization. Someone spots a name, barely visible beneath layers of lichen and time, and it's the wrong one. Everyone has the same reaction. Then, resignation, a few groans, maybe a nervous chuckle, as you all exchange sheepish glances. You've just spent an hour digging up a complete stranger's dearly departed relative. It's mortifying. It's ridiculous. And, in hindsight, it's pretty hilarious. Retreating from the mistaken grave usually turns into a group effort to fix what's been done, hastily shoveling soil back, smoothing things over, making awkward jokes about ghosts who are probably quite annoyed with the disturbance. Somebody always says, let's not mention this part to the boss, and suddenly the group is united in a secret pact. But if you're lucky, the night redeem itself with a well-earned laugh. Once everyone's nerves unravel and the moonlight feels a little less menacing, stories start flying. Collective embarrassment, it turns out, is a powerful bonding experience. Everyone comes away with a story that's too good not to share, even if you leave out a few of the more embarrassing details when retelling it later. What makes these moments stick is their strange mixture of dread and humor. The way fear sharpens every blunder, making even a harmless mistake feel like a wild adventure. In the cold light of day, you can laugh about it, realizing there's something oddly comforting in knowing others have made the same slip-ups. It becomes lore, another gravel in the path of stories traded late at night. So, while digging up the wrong grave may top the list of rookie mistakes, it transforms, over time, into a tradition of sorts. Newcomers hear the tales, veterans roll their eyes and smirk, and everyone knows sooner or later, it's bound to happen again. Because that's the thing about fear. Sometimes, it buries your common sense right where you least expect it, and when you dig it up again, you just have to laugh. You notice prices in the marketplace soar every time someone almost returns from the dead. Garlic is the new gold. Onions, tragically, remain undervalued. A stroll through the main bazaar tells the story. Once, a humble bulb among a legion of produce, garlic now commands its own velvet rope stalls and half-whispered negotiation. The old ladies, those veteran hagglers with hands like walnut shells, cling to their string bags of garlic with the possessiveness of misers. Shopkeepers wink and mutter prices in convoluted codes, nervous that the very suggestion of a sale might set off a minor riot among the lurking resurrectees. If someone so much as brushes near a sack of the stuff with a particularly pale complexion or a funereal whiff, the cost jumps by 10%. Of course, none of this would have happened if the dead had remained conveniently dead. But with each surprise resurrection, now so common that local children compare ghost stories over after-school garlic bread, a new speculative bubble emerges. Garlic futures go wild. Entire family fortunes are made or lost between the time someone sits up groaning in a coffin and the town's bell tolls to announce their miraculous return. No one trusts onions. They make you cry, but they don't keep you safe, notes Mrs. Havisham, chief vendor and unofficial spokesperson for the Garlic Enthusiasts League. Attempts to spark an onion renaissance, posters, pamphlets, one overheard onion-centric ballad, fizzle out. Soggy-eyed citizens mutter that onions are for soups, not safety. Shallots, for their part, hover uncertainly at the fringes, vaguely hopeful but undeniably niche. The mayor, sensing both threat and political opportunity, establishes a garlic reserve. Under armed guard, bushels of the pungent bulbs are stockpiled in a temperature-controlled vault deep beneath City Hall. A new currency, the clove, is proposed, but quickly withdrawn when it's discovered that garlic can, in a pinch, simply be eaten, undermining its value as a stable medium of exchange. Still, promissory notes are issued. I promise to pay the bearer on demand one reasonable handful of good, strong garlic, and soon circulate alongside the usual coins and barter tokens. Gossip is its own form of economy. Whispers spread that counterfeit garlic, mere plumped-up bulbs brushed with scent, is infiltrating the market. Tense citizens demand certifications, notarizations, even arcane rituals to prove authenticity. Black market traders offer garlic extract, twice the warding power, none of the bad breath, but only the very young or the very desperate buy in. For the serious investor, a prime garlic bulb is like a commoner's Feyberg egg. There are specialists, clove keepers, who divine the difference between truly potent garlic and the merely decorative. Stories swirl of ancient, legendary bulbs locked away in salt, destined to be sold for the price of a manor at the next sign of spectral disturbance. Meanwhile, the dead themselves seem bemused by all the bustle. One, interviewed for the Town Gazette, commented, "I don't mind garlic." In bars and backrooms, people speculate openly about when the next surge in garlic will hit, while others hoard onions quietly, convinced that contrarian thinking will one day pay off. Still, as you scan the market, the way the neon-white shine of garlic outshines the rustic brown of onions, you can't help but marvel. In this strange new economy, everything hinges on a root pulled from the earth and hung in clattering braids from the rafters of hope and fear alike. Garlic is gold. Gold is passé. And onions? Still just onions. What's a funeral without posthumous paranoia? You help bolt a lockbox onto a coffin just in case the dearly departed can pick a lock from beyond. Because in a world where people believe in everything from haunted mirrors to cursed dolls, wouldn't it be just your luck if Uncle Jerry, whose only hobby in life was escaping magicians' handcuffs, decided to Houdini his way back out for one last round of cribbage? Grave-safe lockboxes are the security blanket you never knew your afterlife needed. A little extra assurance that whatever's about to happen 6 feet under, it won't involve a midnight resurrection followed by a surprise tax audit. But what exactly does a grave-safe lockbox do? Imagine a bank vault, but for the dearly departed, bolted not inside the living room, but snugly onto the mahogany casket. Shiny chrome. Custom code. Maybe a retinal scanner, just in case Grandma's ghost tries to get clever. The funeral director demonstrates how the box latches onto the coffin, explaining with a straight face that it's for valuables, as if the afterlife is desperately short on commemorative gold coins and faded casino tokens. Someone in the funeral party nervously laughs. No one's sure if they should be relieved or disturbed. As the lock clicks home, stories come tumbling out of the woodwork. Aunt Mabel recounts how, after Cousin Pete's burial, his high school class ring mysteriously vanished from the family plot. Was it sticky-fingered groundskeepers, or was Pete really not done with senior prom memorabilia? You're told, with grave solemnity, that grave robbing is a very real concern, especially if your great-great-grandfather happened to stash away Confederate bonds, rare spoons, or, in one memorable case, a very rare and potentially haunted Beanie Baby. Grave-safe lockboxes, marketed by slightly over-caffeinated salespeople at mortuary trade shows, promise to solve all of these pressing post-mortem dilemmas. Of course, there are skeptics. But the modern grave-safe lockbox isn't just for securing jewelry or secret love letters. The newest models boast motion sensors, Wi-Fi connectivity for the truly tech-savvy poltergeist. Some even offer a companion app that pings your phone if the lock is tampered with, because no one wants to receive a push notification at 3 a.m. that Aunt Doris is on the move. And beneath the bravado and the high-tech trappings, something vulnerable emerges. Grave-safe lockboxes aren't really about actual ghosts, or even crime. They're about the stuff we can't bear to let go, the wedding band worn thin, Dad's lucky poker chip, the locket with a faded Polaroid inside. To lock them up is to insist, if only for a moment longer, that the things, and by extension, the people, we love won't slip through our fingers. That the goodbyes are never truly final as long as some physical thing, however trivial, sits safe behind a gleaming steel bolt. At the end of the service, the lockbox gleams in the dusky light, absurd and comforting in equal measure. Maybe it's a talisman. Maybe it's a joke that's gone too far. Either way, as the grave is filled, the lockbox remains, a chrome-plated punctuation mark on a strange, sorrow-tinged ritual. You try to picture the afterlife's lost and found, shelves stuffed with ancient lockboxes, each sealed with old regrets and whispered family secrets. And so you go home a little unsettled, a little bemused, wondering if, when your own day comes, you'll want a lockbox too, or if it's better to leave some mysteries unbolted for those who come after. You check your pocket. Bell, string, maybe a tiny snack. Early adopters know you can never be too careful, or too prepared for an unexpected resurrection. Consider the late Victorian funeral attendee, weighed down by a curious cargo. Among the somber black creep, out of sight, a miniature bell and a coil of sturdy cord. Not for decoration. Not even a gift for the dearly departed. This, it turns out, is survival insurance, as essential as a handkerchief, if you happen to worry about accidentally being bundled into eternity a bit too early. This isn't just overcautiousness, it's a sign of the era's mechanical ingenuity and, perhaps, its creeping fear of medical misjudgment. Imagine, you're a respectable citizen of 1890. You recall the stories that flicker through public conversation, a faint pulse, a shallow breath, someone mistakenly declared gone who, upon a rude jostling or the cool crash of air, suddenly sits up demanding tea. It's unsettling enough to prompt even the most level-headed to adopt precautions you'd hesitate to confess at dinner. Enter the safety coffin, patented, advertised, very occasionally tested. The concept, a system rigged so that if you should wake in that narrow, muffled darkness, you could tug a cord attached to a bell above ground. The local sexton, or a helpful bystander, would then presumably rush to your rescue, shattered nerves and all. In reality, this was less rescue plan and more psychological insurance. But few at the time would admit to sleeping soundly without a bell, just in case. Of course, Pocket-sized security systems quickly followed. The logic was painfully simple. What if the coffin wasn't equipped? Why rely on someone else's sense of preparedness? Thus, the just-in-case pocket bell, a compact, transportable talisman, equal parts gadget and comfort object. The string coiled carefully. The bell tested, softly, perhaps before each outing. Underlying this proliferation of bells, strings, and half-hushed anxieties was a fascinating contradiction. On the one hand, an age of rationalization, endless inventions, and bustling urban optimism. On the other, the old, creeping dread of being misunderstood by science, or, worse, misfiled by the undertaker. The pocket bell was less about imminent threat, more about negotiating modern uncertainty, a way for the practical Victorian to reconcile technological progress with existential worry. Looking back, these just-in-case devices seem almost comical in their excess. But that little bell was more than a prop. It gave the owner agency in the most powerless of situations. It allowed for contingency planning of a particularly personal kind. If being prepared is half the battle, then surely the other half is worrying yourself into careful, bell-equipped readiness. The ritual, too, was instructive. The early adopter kneels by the bedside each night, pocket bell within reach, string untangled, and sleeps, if they can, with the same mixture of skepticism and hope that defines the era. A time capsule of collective anxiety, wrapped up in something so small it could be mistaken for a child's toy. In the end, most would never need their bell. But in a world where the line between life and death sometimes blurred, it was better to ring and be sure, than to risk a silence mistaken for the end. So next time you check your pockets, spare a thought for those 19th century pragmatists, with their bells and their strings, just trying to make it safely to tomorrow, one thoughtful precaution at a time. You finally attempt sleep, pulling garlic to your chest like a teddy bear. Every creak outside could be vindication for centuries of collective worry, or just another neighbor tripping on their own paranoia. Across the centuries, the business of resting in peace was anything but passive. The weight of 1,000 superstitions pressed on each bedtime ritual, especially if your local graveyard had a reputation for the restless. If the wind howled just right, or you heard a scratch at the shutters, you could almost picture some poor soul, with less than stellar burial credentials, making a comeback tour through the garden. For many, staying asleep wasn't about counting sheep, but about counting the ways spirits might crash your slumber party. Every culture had its methods. In parts of Eastern Europe, crucifixes weren't just decorations, they were tactical defense systems. A horseshoe above the door, poppy seeds on the windowsill, in case a passing revenant felt compelled to count them, thus forgetting you entirely, and of course, garlic everywhere. Garlic over doorways, in pouches under pillows, occasionally woven into tasteful necklaces, essentially turning anxiety into an interior design motif. The midnights were thick with stories of bodies refusing to stay put. Folklore swirled around contagious afterlives, plague victims who seemed to haunt their old haunts, or loved ones whose lives were so big they defied the boundaries between world and underworld. To ward off this brand of existential insomnia, some towns upgraded their cemeteries with elaborate safety coffins, booby-trapped with bells, flags, or even tiny breathing pipes for the exceptionally cautious or deeply optimistic. If you managed to doze off, there was always the risk of sleep paralysis, known back then as the demon sitting on your chest, or maybe just indigestion. Either way, you'd wake with a gasp and the firm resolve to up your garlic intake by at least 3 cloves tomorrow. Superstitions spread like a contagion of their own, a misplaced shoe by the bedside for good luck, ink sigils scrawled on window glass, family dogs posted as living burglar alarms for roaming phantoms. Fears were social glue, spawning whole cottage industries of bells, charms, prayers, and, at least once in colonial New England, a decent sideline in vampire heart removal, for the truly sleep-deprived. If the afterlife's paperwork got messy, it was your bedtime that paid the price. Yet, for all the collective panic, there was also resilience, an almost stubborn optimism that the right mixture of ritual and household produce could fend off doom. Even in villages racked with loss, people clung to hope, if not that the dead would stay dead, then at least that they'd wait until sunrise to make their complaints known. Fast forward to tonight. The echoes of old superstitions rumble through every groan of the central heating and every shadow cast by passing headlights. You lie cocooned in modern comforts, perhaps more concerned about phone chargers and lost socks than vampires. But in certain sleepy moments, the primitive urge to check under the bed, or keep a cherished protective object close at hand, isn't so different from what your ancestors felt. So, as you sink into sleep, remember, you've survived another wild day in the golden age of uneasy resting places. Whether you were dodging peasant zombies, ringing one last frantic bell, or just layering yourself in garlic for peace of mind, history proves that people are absolutely relentless when it comes to not trusting the unknown. As you drift off, be grateful for the absurdity and resilience of our ancestors, who may not have had Wi-Fi, but who sure made up for it with bells, spicy necklaces, and the most complicated bedtime rituals ever invented. Tonight, tucked into your clean, vampire-proof bed, send up a quiet thank you that your only nighttime disturbance might be a snoring partner, as opposed to Uncle Thomas clawing his way back for round 2. So, as you sink into sleep, remember, you've survived another wild day in the golden age of uneasy resting places. Whether you were dodging peasant zombies, ringing one last frantic bell, or just layering yourself in garlic for peace of mind, history proves that people are absolutely relentless when it comes to not trusting the unknown. As you drift off, be grateful for the absurdity and resilience of our ancestors, who may not have had Wi-Fi, but who sure made up for it with bells, spicy necklaces, and the most complicated bedtime rituals ever invented. Tonight, tucked into your clean, vampire-proof bed, send up a quiet thank you that your only nighttime disturbance might be a snoring partner, as opposed to Uncle Thomas clawing his way back for round 2. Sleep well, and remember, history is full of things that go bump in the night, most of them running late for burial, again.